Hi, everybody. Welcome to Life Stories Podcast, People Helping People. I'm Shara Goswick, your host. Today on the podcast, I talk with Laura Helgeson, who founded a program called Let's Talk UTI. This issue is very important to Laura, and she explains why in our conversation. If you have ever had a problem with this, which a majority of women in their lifetime will, you need to listen to this conversation and understand why she's bringing awareness and what you can do also to help. I thank you for listening. Hi.
Sarah.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. So where are you? Where are you fixing to get that big storm?
We live in Minneapolis.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and we're headed up to the North Shore, which is right by Canada. It's where Lake
Okay.
Superior is. So
Okay.
they're expecting about 10 inches of snow starting. We thought
Oh,
it was going to start late tomorrow afternoon, but it's actually
yeah.
going to start early tomorrow morning. So we're like, what are we going to do?
Oh my goodness.
We
That
just have
is
a
so
little bit of a
exciting.
break coming up this week, and we thought, oh, we
Yeah.
got to take advantage.
Yes. I bet it's gorgeous. I bet it's
It'll
just
be
so
fun.
pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, I don't want to keep you too long. I'm so worried about being on the road and
Don't worry because we'll be
okay.
fine. It was just a matter of
Okay.
like we'll have an hour of dark driving, and that's no big deal. It
Okay.
doesn't matter. Yeah.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
definitely wanted to keep this. I'm
Well,
really
I'm
looking
so
forward to talking with
glad.
you.
Me too. I, like many women in this world, have suffered from UTIs multiple times. And I
Mm.
think it's very interesting, what you're doing. I think it's so important. But how in the world did you ever have an idea to create this program for people about UTIs? Because that's a very specific and unique thing. So,
Yeah.
what ever drove you to begin doing something like this?
Well, I have had this infection since I was 2 years old, and I'm now going to be 60 this coming fall. So that's a lot of years.
Yeah.
I haven't really seen any change in the testing or treatment in that time.
Yeah.
I really can't tell you. Maybe they've added a few procedures that might be
Yeah.
helpful, but um, in any case, as it got worse and worse through my perimenopause and menopause, I had to stop working. I was an interfaith minister, worked
Yeah.
mainly with people who were recovering from addiction and their
Yeah.
families. And I was also a professional musician, and
Oh, wow.
I played with the Minnesota Opera and other jobs, and it was
That's
really
neat.
fun. Yeah, so as I was unable to do those jobs and my world was getting smaller and smaller because
Yeah.
of this infection, I kept looking for something of an organization to represent patients and to have
Yeah.
the patient voice heard in the US, and I couldn't find anything.
Yeah.
I talked to people in Europe. There's one wonderful organization in Europe called Live UTI Free. They are our colleagues, and also the people in Australia. And they hadn't really known of anything either in the United States. So I thought somebody's got to do it.
Yeah.
I can do this from home. So I did.
That's amazing. So, this has been something sporadic throughout my life, but I guess there are people who are suffering a lot from this.
Mhm.
For somebody that doesn't know really anything about, other than when you get an infection, it's very painful and it does disrupt your life.
Mhm.
What are some things that cause these infections?
Well, because I was 2 years old, I wasn't really in charge
Right.
of too much
Right.
of my life experience.
Yeah.
I certainly wasn't having sexual intercourse or
Right.
anything like that. And I hadn't had my hormones drop
Right.
of menopause. So
Right.
I think you can get into this infection in many different ways, but I think it's really important to note, because this doesn't happen often in the clinician's office, that it isn't really about lifestyle. Lifestyle changes can help,
Yeah.
but um, it's not about lifestyle. And if it were, we'd all be better. Um,
Right.
so what I would say is there are some things you can do, but and some natural remedies work really well for people.
Yeah.
D-mannose is one of those.
Yeah.
It's just like a tablet that you take and it adheres to the E. coli in your bladder and
Um,
washes it away, which is very helpful for if that's your bacteria. But this
right.
can be a multibacterial infection. So yeah. So I think one of the main things that I'm thinking about is the fact that the testing has not been improved since the 1950s,
Oh, wow.
and it was never intended to test for lower urinary tract symptoms. It was
Um,
intended to test pregnant women who had kidney infections.
oh,
So the test that's offered everywhere around the world
right.
is was never intended for UTIs, and also um, it's very fallible. It can provide false negatives a lot of the
Mhm.
time, especially as you get into recurrent and chronic infections. So
Yeah.
that's been a big problem with just how patients are treated because
Yeah.
the doctor comes back and says your test is negative when it's very, very possible they have an infection which is embedded into their bladder lining.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
very odd that it hasn't been updated since the 50s. That, I mean, because it's such a common problem.
Mhm.
That surprises me.
Well, I think that's why I felt this was so important to do.
Yeah.
This will affect 60% of women in their lifetime,
Right.
and 30% of those women will go on to have recurrent and chronic infections.
Mm,
So this is a massive amount of our population worldwide.
yeah.
Um, Part of what I think is perhaps the infections have become worse because there's a lot of antimicrobial resistance going on with antibiotics.
Mhm.
And also that, you know, it's a woman's illness for the most part until you get into a real elderly state. Um,
Right.
and I don't know that that's been helpful because women weren't even included in research until 1998.
Wow.
So we've got now's the time to break the silence and to make
Ah,
sure that people know they're not alone. They're so sad and suffering. And when
yeah.
I say what I do, almost all the time, somebody says, "This is my story," or
Wow.
my grandparent, I was supposed to be with them over the Christmas holiday, and they died of urosepsis,
Oh my
which is
goodness.
a sepsis caused by urinary tract infection.
Wow.
So this is the silence needs to stop, and I'm so grateful you're having me here because that's part of the
Absolutely.
way. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I know you're bringing great awareness to this issue, but how are you helping people online? Because you've got lots of resources online. How are
Mhm.
you helping people who are suffering from this?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a great question. So we've just launched our new nonprofit, which was an extension from our older business. The new nonprofit is called Let's Talk UTI.
Yeah.
And we've beefed up our website with resources. So in our website, you can find links to support groups. They're mostly on Facebook. You can find stories from other patients who tell their own story. They're always a little bit different, but
Right.
everybody's story helps other people know that they're not alone.
Okay.
You can find our blogs. We've got a pretty extensive blog catalog at this point,
Mm,
and they dive deep into um, various issues, like what is recurrent
right.
UTI, and what are biofilms, and why, when biofilms get involved, do we find it's so hard to treat an infection? There's
Yeah.
so many different topics, and that's super
Yeah.
helpful for people. Um, and I think mainly it's just to know that they're not alone because
Yeah.
it can be so lonely. People feel so much shame around it because they're
Right.
meant to feel that way oftentimes at the
Yeah.
healthcare office.
That
Yeah,
stinks. I hate
it
that.
does. It does. And we need to hold those um, healthcare workers in our hearts because they have not had the resources that they need
Right.
to treat patients. They haven't
Yeah.
had the proper testing resources. They haven't had the proper treatment resources because they haven't been developed. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So what are they supposed to do?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So if somebody comes, let's say somebody comes to you and they are having this chronic issue and they're not finding help anywhere. What kind of suggestions or help could you give them?
Yeah. I mean, first and foremost, I would tell them to get involved with those Facebook support groups
Yeah.
because they're what I would call patient experts on those
Yeah.
support groups. And they touch on a lot of different topics. And that's where I found out, the doctor that I end up ended up going to in
Mhm.
Louisiana, by the way.
Oh, wow.
From Minnesota, that's not a short trip.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So those support groups, they can answer a lot of questions, and you can ask a lot of questions of the people who have a lot of experience, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Um, so that would be first and foremost. Unfortunately, I would love to give you a list of doctors and practitioners that are working in this area,
Yeah.
um, but mostly people are seeing their general practitioners. As I said, they have limited resources for being of service,
Right.
and they're seeing urologists who are also in the same boat. There
Yeah.
are a few people practicing in the United States who believe in like long-term antibiotic support.
Yeah.
So that would be, you know, treatment dose or therapeutic dose antibiotics for a very long period of time. That
Right.
is the treatment that I've been on for a long period of time.
Oh, wow.
And I would say that's the reason I'm able to talk to you today
Yeah.
because I, got a bit better. I'm not cured by any means, but I got a bit better, so my life became more functional.
I understand recurring,
Mhm.
infections, but I didn't realize that people could have them that don't ever go away. I really didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I've been experiencing that since I entered into
Yeah.
menopause, and it's kind of a beast, I will tell
Yes.
you. And that's where I really got to the point where I couldn't work anymore and needed to get some extreme help, and I
Yeah.
had to do a lot of my own research to find that. And so often the patients with this illness, especially in a chronic state or even in a recurring state, um, we have to do our own research in order to find any help because it's just the education for healthcare workers is
Right.
not there. So we have to educate ourselves.
Yeah.
That's part of why I'm doing this is because let's let the patients know what's available so they can talk to their doctors about it.
Yeah.
Sometimes doctors don't like that because they feel that the patient is sort of lording over them.
Right.
I just really encourage practitioners to be teammates with their patients because
Yeah.
we all need that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those support groups that you talked about, they make so much sense. I remember there was a book that came out years and years ago that I used to buy every time a friend of mine would get pregnant or have their first baby. And it was called The Girlfriend's Guide to Pregnancy. And it was everything your doctor doesn't tell you. And it wasn't a medical book, it wasn't medical advice, but it was other moms that were saying, okay, this is what's going to happen because they know they'd experienced it. So I think that's so smart that you have those groups for people because they can help each other out. This is working for me. This did not work for me. Maybe try this. I
Mhm.
think that's great that they have that to go to.
Yeah, I think these groups sort of started organically on Facebook. There are some that are based in Australia and New Zealand, some that are based in the United Kingdom, some that
Wow.
are based here. So you have to kind of find the one that you feel is best suited to you.
Sure.
But they have thousands and thousands of members, which would
Yeah.
say that this is a real problem.
Yes, absolutely it is.
Yeah.
So I know there's no, perfect cure or there are things that you can do, but what are some things that we shouldn't do if we are prone to infections? What are some things that we should avoid? Are there foods or drinks we should be avoiding or
Many people in the UTI world, or I would call it the UTI space or community,
Mhm.
are also diagnosed with something called interstitial cystitis.
Mhm.
Um, we call it IC for short because that's kind of a mouthful.
Yeah.
And that diagnosis is a diagnosis of exclusion, which means they can't test for it.
Yeah.
And there aren't really biomarkers for it. So some people in the UTI community don't believe that it is actually a diagnosis, but yet it is an undetected infection. So
Um,
there are these advanced testing, PCR and next generation sequencing tests that are available
mhm.
widely in the United States. They just haven't been adopted yet into practice. And with those, oftentimes this diagnosis can be, you know, given explanation to because of they detect an infection and then you can treat the infection.
Yeah.
So we've got a little bit of a stumbling block there. But your question was like, what shouldn't they do? Um, it's so hard to say because again, it's like I kind of feel like it's like, what shouldn't a cancer patient do? Like, I don't,
Right. I know there's
it's
not a
not our
perfect
fault.
answer. Yeah.
Right. So there are some things that do help. Like a lot of people say that you should change out of your exercise outfits as soon as possible and
Hmm.
wash. People say that you should pee after sexual intercourse. And I think these are all great ideas. Um,
Yeah.
some foods tend to bother people, and I think that's really widely varying amongst
Yeah.
people living with this illness.
Sure.
And the reason I started it on the IC topic is because there's something called the IC diet, which you
Mm,
can find online, and that might be helpful for
yeah.
people in just discovering which foods tend to be more bladder irritating than others.
Yeah.
But I haven't really noticed that anything helps.
Yeah.
And as I said, some people do, and for that reason, I'm very hopeful, that some
Yes.
people do notice that they can take some supplements and that will help.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
Good. I love that you are fighting for this subject for people because it isn't talked about. I mean,
right.
nobody wants to talk about their, when they're infected and hurting, and that's not a common subject. But I love that you're
Especially in
bringing,
that area of the body.
yes,
Yeah.
you're bringing awareness to something that happens a lot. It happens to
Mhm.
a lot of people and often. And so I hope that with your awareness that more testing will be done and they will change it, and there will be help that
Right.
so many people need. What have I not asked you about that you would like to talk about?
You've asked wonderful questions. Um, I've been involved with some people doing some wonderful research,
Uh-huh.
trying to find the answer for what is it that some people can fight this infection off and others can't?
Yeah.
Is it genetic? Is it hormonal? Does it have to do with other things that we just don't know yet? And the answer
Mm.
is we don't know yet.
Yeah.
But I think there is a large gap between what research knows and what medical students are taught and clinicians know.
Hmm.
I think there's a big education effort that needs to not only happen for the patients, but also, and probably more importantly, for the physicians.
Yeah.
Um, so just for them to know that it has been proven that urine is not sterile. There's a lot of good bugs in there, along with some obviously very bad bugs.
Yeah.
Um, it has been proven that the bacteria does embed into the layers of the bladder lining, making it impossible really for um, antibiotics to get to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is an actual thing. And oftentimes, people in our community, if they bring that to their physician, they'll say, that's not a thing.
Right.
But we have slides. I've seen it in slides. So there's a doctor doing wonderful work on this, a researcher. So my goal really is to try to fill that gap and just to
Mhm.
communicate to patients and physicians, clinicians, anyone who works with us, um, that this research has been done and proven, and it would be so awesome if they
Yeah.
knew it and then honored their patients' symptoms.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's really it. We need to hold each other with, more carefulness.
Yes. Well, I
Yeah.
love that you know that they can help. You're just trying to bring, awareness to even the physicians. You're not dogging the physicians for not knowing. They've not been taught. They
One
don't.
thing that I would say, you're absolutely right about that. But one thing I would say about anybody in this space or any space when it comes to healthcare and working with patients is it has to be a team effort,
Right.
and the patient is a collaborator,
Yeah.
and the patient is to be believed about their bodily experience because they're
Yeah.
the ones who have the information, they're the experts on their own bodies. And I
Yeah.
think that's missing. Not across the board, but
Right.
it's missing quite a bit.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
is. Well, I am thankful for what you're doing. I think it's so important. And I hope that, there may be people listening who struggle with this, who haven't talked about it or have had questions and didn't know where to ask. Or so I hope they will be pointed to I'm going to have your website and everything listed so they know where to find you. But I hope maybe somebody's going to reach out and say, hey, I need help, or thank you for posting what you did or providing what you did, because I think it's important. It's
Yeah,
one of those things, like I said, we don't talk about and we
right.
don't want anybody to know about, but it's a
Mhm.
big issue. I've had them before and they're very painful and
Very.
it does disrupt your life. And
Mhm.
I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing. I
Thank you, and I'm
appreciate
glad you're
you.
doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I have talked to people all over the world that are helping others in unique ways. And I was excited to see you on Podmatch because I thought this is great. This is a very important subject. So
Thank
I'm
you.
thankful that I got to talk to you today.
And
And
I'm thankful as well.
I appreciate you and I want you to be safe.
Oh,
Be
we
safe
will be.
driving.
It'll be just fine. We just have to get there. Either we're going to have to get there before tomorrow morning early, or we're going to have to probably wait 3 days before we can
Oh
go.
no, oh no. Oh, I'm in Texas, so I never have to deal with any of that. So it's so
Yeah.
foreign to me.
Yeah.
So
It's kind of a fun adventure.
oh yes, it is. And
Yeah.
like I said, I bet it's just beautiful. So
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
very nice. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I really appreciate it. And
Thank you, Shara.
I will be in touch with you.
Okay. Take
Alrighty.
care.
Thanks, you too. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.